So I want to step away from Palestine for a moment, just to look at this kind of state of the left in the U.S., which I think appears to be, riven by the issue of vaccines at the moment, with some
Mm,
on the left kind of veering into a conspiratorial reaction against
mm,
vaccines and experts on the subject of the pandemic and public health. And this isn't
mm,
just happening on the left, but obviously we're people of the left. So I just wanted to get your take on, you know, I've seen you engage in this a bit on Twitter, this debate
mm,
over the issue of vaccines
mm,
and the pandemic with some people who are on the left. So, what do you think is going on here? Because
mm.
I think there's a lot of people who are watching this play out, and they're just like, the left kind of seems to be attacking itself over
Yeah.
this issue.
Well, obviously, I've thought a lot about this, and some of the stuff I've seen is disturbing in terms of so-called, pseudo-leftist anti-vax stuff and COVID denial, and really kind of like childish analysis of, big pharma, like as if we all think big pharma is bad, is great,
Yeah,
as if we're
right.
all like think that big pharma hasn't been corrupt for decades and hasn't been, you know, uh, a major problem for a very long time. Um, I think that in a way there has been, a lot of this is online in the
Hmm.
sense that uh, I'm not sure how representative it is of wider views. And I think I've reached the conclusion that it is a smaller number of people than you would think who hold these sorts of anti-vax and other COVID denialist views. But I think that there can be an effect, and we've seen this with other issues. We saw it with Syria, for example, a few years ago, where a relatively small number of people can dominate the discourse to the point where others are just afraid to step in.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I'm going to avoid that. I don't need this headache, which is why I've felt a need to be more vocal uh, about it, because I saw a situation where like people are too afraid to say like things like that COVID is real, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and that's just, it's crazy to me. Uh, that there is. I just come back to fundamentals. What's happening in the real world as we speak right now in the United States on this day? Hospitalizations are back up to 105,000. A couple of weeks ago, they were around 60,000. So we've had a huge surge in hospitalizations, back up, actually exceeding last winter's peak. We see healthcare workers screaming at the top of their lungs for support and relief, and talking about the exhaustion and the grief and the trauma that they're facing because they're overworked. We're seeing hospitals and hospital systems across the country in a state of crisis after 2 years of pandemic, and now the hospitals are filling up again, and
Yeah.
you know people that and totally wrong claims that like the US, lockdown. We've had no lockdowns in the US. You can go to a sports bar, you can go to a sports game, you can go to a movie theater, you can go shopping, you can go to a restaurant. You can do whatever you like in America. There are no really uh, nothing more than minor inconveniences for the most part, and um, and there's no public health system. There's no public health ethos. We're in the third year of a pandemic. You can't get tested. You can't. You At least in the first year there was extended unemployment. There was PPP. There was other forms of relief. There was student loans deferred. Things that were not enough at all. Not
No.
enough at all, but they were lifelines for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And now we're like, the government, the
Doesn't care.
Democratic Party, Joe Biden is like, you're all on your own, and there's no more help. There's not even
Yep.
the crumbs that we were giving you before. And workers are being forced to work in dangerous conditions. And we're told that the people who want basic protections, for people's health and safety are somehow the tyrants and the shills of big pharma. And really, it's this right-wing agenda, which is we want everyone back to work as soon as possible. We want business to continue. Everything has to go on before. And the fact that like 1,400 people are dying every day. I mean, when this started, I was too naive, too innocent to think that Americans would tolerate this level of mass death day after day after day after day. COVID is the third biggest killer in the United States right now after heart disease and cancer. It's the third biggest killer. In the age group 45 to 54, which is the age group I'm in, COVID is the single biggest killer of Americans. And there's people who are denying this. The effect of vaccines is undeniable. The data is very clear. No, vaccines don't prevent every infection. No, vaccines are not a cure-all. They're not perfect. But it's very clear that vaccines reduce the risk of death from COVID overall by a factor of 12 to 15.
Right.
They reduce the chance. They don't eliminate. They reduce the chance of infection and they reduce the spread. But of course, because there's no basic understanding of public health in this country, people don't understand that vaccines are not intended, have never been intended as a personal, private solution.
Yeah.
Vaccines are a population-level intervention, and they work best when the largest number of people are vaccinated. That's true with the measles vaccine, which, by the way, is mandatory for school children in all 50 United States, like polio and like a bunch of other vaccines. It's mandatory. It's mandated for school children in 50 states of the United States. And so measles, if you have a measles vaccine, but the level of vaccination falls below a certain high percentage, you get measles outbreaks.
Yep.
So it's the same with this vaccine. Yes, the vaccine does provide a level of personal individual protection, but a vaccine is a population-level intervention. And the Biden administration's vaccine-only policy was a disaster, and it was a disastrous decision to go the vaccine-only route. Because if people didn't want to go get vaccinated, and you don't want to or can't force them, but you've abandoned any other form of mitigation, that's why we are where we are now with over 800,000 dead. And you have people who claim to be, on the left saying, oh, well, nothing works. Well, other countries, look at China, but at what cost, of course, we're told. But in a country of 1.4 billion people like China, if they had had the same policies as the United States with respect to COVID, that would mean millions would have died by now. Millions would have died. Instead, China has had only a few thousand deaths. So we can debate. There's a legitimate debate to be had about, what's the right level of restriction of people's activities. For how long, and I would not deny that some of the stuff has been pretty extreme, like seeing the Netherlands set dogs on anti-lockdown. That's crazy.
Yeah.
No one would support that. But what we've seen is kind of an unhinged unmooring from the boring stuff, which is science-driven public health policy. And I think the other thing, I want to say this, there is a basic misunderstanding of how science works. I don't know if it's because I'm from the 20th century and had a somewhat science-focused education for certain times in my life, that you understand that science is an iterative process. What you know now, you will know more in a year
Yes.
maybe you will learn in a year that some of what you thought now was wrong because more evidence comes in, more data comes in. So when we're dealing with a brand new pathogen, there's bound to be things that were said 2 or 3 years ago that turn out to be wrong. There have been certainly been, deliberate misstatements sometimes from governments, but that doesn't mean that everything was a conspiracy, everything was an intentional lie. And so for me, it is just so disappointing to see so many people lose their ability to reason and evaluate information. And that's my job. That's my job as a journalist, is to look at information and to assess it, and to understand what is credible, what isn't. And I think there is also a strong parallel to climate denial,
Yes. Oh, 100%.
where like a tiny number of cranks who were denying the overwhelming body of evidence were for a long time given like equal play in the media, as
Right.
if they should be taken as seriously or given the same weight as this huge scientific consensus. I think the other thing that's important to know, or important for all of us to remember, is that it is to know what you don't know. In other words, I can understand as a layperson, I can read scientific articles, I can read analyses by scientists and by doctors, and I can understand them to a certain extent. But I also need to know what I don't understand and what is
Exactly.
beyond my reasoning. And at some level, you have to say, well, here is a large body of people who've spent years or decades studying viruses, studying epidemiology, studying vaccines. Maybe they know, maybe their knowledge and effort has some value. I can't believe we're reduced to having to say this. In other words,
It's sad.
I
Yeah.
don't want to get medical advice from random trolls on Twitter. So
Right.
so it's like, I think at a certain point we just have to like just
Be
move,
done.
just
Yeah.
just be willing to live in the real world and to understand. Yes, there is some liberal overreaction to COVID or whatever, but liberals, the DNC didn't invent the virus.
No.
They
Not
didn't
we know.
invent,
Yeah.
MSNBC didn't invent the virus. The
It's
virus,
real.
the virus is real and it's killing a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's not the virus alone, because with any pathogen or any issue like that, it's a combination of the pathogen and the environment. So that's why exactly the same virus can kill close to 1 million people in the United States, 600,000 people in Brazil, but only 5,000 in China and only 50 in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And that's why these policy debates matter. That's why, sadly, we can't avoid them. But I think what we have to really just not be afraid, we can't be intimidated by people who want to like gaslight us that vaccines are a big pharma conspiracy to make profits. Sure, they want to make profits, and they will, because that's our system. They'll make a ton of profits from the vaccines. But the idea that corporate America wants lockdowns, wants the
It's the opposite. It's the
everyone
opposite.
out there shopping and dining and flying and taking cruises, even if it kills them.